Birds. Yes, I'd like to take a few moments to share with you my experiences and feeling about birds. This one is obviously colorful, and many birds are colorful, and many are, well, of more muted color, but birds have a special place in my heart. And they are, for me, they are the highest extension of the animal kingdom, maybe because they rise the highest, and they may be one of the most colorful of all animals. They are unique unto themselves. Science is not quite sure how many species there are. Some say 10,000, some say 15, some say maybe as many as 20,000 species of birds. They're not even sure how many birds are on Earth. Some say 200 billion birds. Some say is half a trillion birds. There could be 500 billion birds. No one's quite sure. They're very hard to take a census of. And obviously, they are quite capable of going many places. Some birds travel a long ways. They're the known record of a bird flying nonstop are birds who fly from Siberia to Australia 7,500 miles without a stop. They don't drink or eat, they just fly for 7,500 miles. Some birds, like the hummingbird, as tiny as they are, they go a very long ways. But I've had some unusual experiences with birds. Maybe that's why they are meaningful to me. I'm going to share an experience I had, which was quite spontaneous, and it changed my view of birds. In my very early 30s, I was examining my iris, and I noticed that there was a certain bubble in the position of the heart in my right eye. And right when I noticed this bubble, I heard the sound of a bird singing as it flew by. And I thought to myself, I like that. Each time I hear a bird, I'm going to open my own heart like the bird and celebrate some song of my heart as I almost feel myself flying with the bird. Just as a reminder, a spontaneous way to be spontaneous and to practice. Now, this method of practice, I find out later, is highly effective for many things. To use different sensory experiences in a repetitive way. I found that the number of repetitions between 3 and 4 months often gave me the greatest results. You can try it for yourself. In this one, every time a bird came by, I opened my heart and I flew along with the bird, imagined myself in the heart of the bird, reminding myself to care about my own heart. It was just an exercise. I wasn't really intending for anything to occur. Then one morning on the coast of California, Southern California, in the winter, which is where most of the birds of Canada go to the south to holiday for the winter season in Canada in the north, they go to coastal California, and there are forests with thousands and thousands of birds there for the winter. I was walking in the forest one morning at sunrise, and I didn't think about my bird exercise, but then suddenly my heart exploded, and little miniature copies of me, little humanoid copies of me, thousands of copies of me went out. And from each one of those copies, I had eyes. And then I could see out of all of those. And then I went across the forest and entered the heart of thousands of birds at once. While looking out the bird's eyes, I could see in Panavision, 360 degrees, I can see in all directions simultaneously and experience. Just so you know, this was not on any drug or substance of any kind. This was a sunrise walk where I discovered that certain things work. In this moment, I was literally inside the heart of the bird looking out, and I was experiencing what each individual bird was doing. And the collective combination of these thousands of birds all doing at the same time. What they were doing was quite remarkable. What they were doing? The light, the light, the light, the light, the light. Sunrise was happening. Those birds put me to shame. I have never celebrated the coming of sunrise like that. I usually close my drapes and when I, like, oh, the light, the light, the light. The celebratory joy was so powerful. My heart was just flooded with immense joy. And in that moment, a voice came through the top of my head and said these very simple words. God knows every sparrow. And had I stayed 1 second longer, I'm pretty sure my heart would have exploded. But then, just like that, thousands of little miniature me's are racing across the forest from all directions, all simultaneously. And they all came and they landed right in my own heart. I fell on the floor of the forest and sobbed for joy. I must confess, I did beg to do it again. Didn't happen. I learned some beautiful things in that moment that I have reflected upon for decades since then. Yes, certain forms of practice over a period of weeks or months, particularly between 3 and 4 months, is a threshold where you can have experiences if you choose. So I'm sharing with you a series of things I've done. This is one of them. And some of them come spontaneously without much effort at all. This one was particularly personal and emotionally strong. Part of it is I recognize that birds have a certain type of consistency. Nearly all birds have, wings. And isn't it interesting that one of our symbols of angels is wings and feathers? Well, yes, I must confess, I have seen some angels before, but I've never seen a feather and I've never seen a wing. But it's interesting that the birds correspond to amazing capacities of the heart, celebratory experiences, and joy. And one of my experiences is the experience of the thymus. The thymus, if you don't know, is a gland that sits very close to the top of the heart. In small children, the thymus is the largest and can cover up to half of the heart. But adults, it kind of gets smaller and separates from the heart. But you should know that the one species on Earth that has the largest thymus as a percentage of body weight is the songbird. the songbird's capacity to experience celebratory joy, where they use their authenticity and throat and they're singing songs. Well, you know what it's like when you hear beautiful music and you hear songs. There's a celebratory joy that can arise. So the experiences that birds have taught me, they've also taught me that one of the ways to go from the heart up is sometimes you just need to fly. Well, there's many forms of flying I've experienced, and I'll share with you some of the ways I've done that. But the experience about the bird is the nature of the wings. Birds have wings. Now, for me, the wings have metaphors of meaning. It means broaden your capacity to feel, elevate on the wings of the capacity to grow, move upward, the wings, the wings, the wings. We look at our wings, and could you imagine life if nobody had arms? Nobody had arms or hands. Well, notice that the use of the arms, the use of the hands, is the way that we care for, bond with. Our hands and arms, they open the heart and the oxytocin experience of bonding and feeling. And there's something about the lateral nature of wings, this lateral function of the wings. Later on, I have some suggestions about the lateral use of your wings to actually be involved in the long-term experience of things that you would desire to want to feel. More about that later, but back to the experience of birds. I'm going to share with you, one normal experience of birds and then an unusual experience of birds. One of them, both stories are about eagles, but the first one is a real, true story. So was the other one, but this is quite one you could really understand. I used to live on an island off the coast of Washington, North America, near the border of Canada, and it was called Orcas Island, and I had a little house on the beach, and I would go out each day on my little boat, a tiny little 12-foot boat, and I would fish for salmon. I would catch them almost every day, and I noticed that there were bald eagles in the forest near the island. One day I accidentally hooked a small little bottom fish. It comes up from very deep, and when they come up, they don't go back down. I took the little fish off and threw it by my boat and hoped it would go back in the water, but out of the sky came a bald eagle and grabbed that fish right next to my boat, and you could feel the wind off of the wings. I was quite startled, but from that day on, I occasionally fished for small fish on the bottom. I would catch one. I learned how, do it quite easily. And then I would take my boat over to the end of the island where the two eagles had a nest. And I learned to throw a fish out on the bank, and they would come down. And I was very surprised that those eagles, they didn't really share. It's not like they would sit there and nibble. No, one gets that fish and flies off, and the other one screams and screams. And pretty soon, I learned to bring two fish. So I would throw one on the bank, and one would come by. They would come within 2 meters of me. And I'd throw another fish out. Sometimes I would throw out a fish right on the bank within, 1.5 meters of the boat. Both eagles would come in from opposite directions, just above the top of my head, screaming at each other, and they would hit in the air, and then one would get the fish. Woo! I did this for 3 years. I got so good at it that whenever I caught a salmon, I would clean them on the beach, and I would just cut the head off of the salmon, throw it on the beach next to me. The eagle would come out of the air, pick up the head, and leave. It was nice. So I started keeping fish, small ones, in my refrigerator at the house. And then whenever a friend would come visit from some far off place, I would go, well, have you ever seen a bald eagle? No, I've never seen a bald eagle in the wild. Well, here, let me show you one. So I took a friend of mine out on the deck on a windy day, and I said, you see those two small dots up there, maybe 3 miles high? You barely see them. Watch. And I would wave the fish back and forth, and those eagles would dive down to the tree sitting right next to my deck, two white bald eagles. They loved fish. They were trainable. It was one of my favorite things to do. I would just throw them the fish and they would take that fish and leave. My friends would be in awe that, I love birds. They're symbols of something that bridges reality. Symbols from the top of the head, for me, later on, the colors, by the way, of birds are from minerals. That's all they are, ions of specific mineral kingdom functions producing these colors. It is the elevation of minerals. By the way, the correspondence for me in the Rayid terminology, minerals correspond to the mineral kingdom that corresponds to the will. Minerals, rocks, will, foundation. Will, foundation. To elevate the will is to bring the elements of the mineral kingdom higher to produce this realm of colors. Colors and joy. So what's the message that birds offer about colors and joy? And many other things, by the way, but one more little story about birds. There are other ones, but this is one of my favorites. And this one happened without my, active desire. I had been meditating for extended periods of time and had done so over months, asking many different things. But then one day, in the middle of a meditation, my inner vision opened. When the inner vision opens, it is many times more beautiful and real than what you believe is reality. I know it's kind of shocking to consider that you can have experiences where the range of colors and light are actually greater than you can see in the physical world. Then you realize that the physical world is filled with shadows. Everything has shadows. But in that light, there are no real shadows, and the perception of the reality becomes even greater than you can with your physical senses, because the physical senses are limited to certain spectrums. But enough of that. Back to the bird. When my inner vision opened, I saw myself as a young Native American man, maybe in his late 20s. He had only a typical loincloth, no shirt, clutching his chest because he was bleeding. He was bleeding because, I had just been in a battle. I felt myself as that young Indian man, and I was hurrying through a thicket of trees to an edge of a cliff where I needed to climb up the side of a cliff. And I climbed over to a small finger of rocks about the size of my body. And I laid down on my back and I pointed the top of my head to the sun. And the moment my head touched the rock, I died. And when I died, out of this wound in my chest came a magnificent white eagle. This pure white bird had wings much longer than my arms. And it was noble and beautiful and alive and mighty and pure white. And it had these powerful orient, and it moved upward and it started to climb, and it climbed in a upward spiral, and it went straight up, higher and higher and higher to the upper realms occupied by only a few birds. Well, this was one of those birds that could go to the highest. Well, it just so happens that the highest realm of the physical spectrum is actually the gateway into another world. But in the next moment, I saw myself as a humanoid man coming through the bottom of a floor, like coming through into another realm. But this time I was not a bird, I was a man, and I was covered with diamond-like sequins, like glistening colors of light, pure light all over. And I was like a ninja, powerful warrior again. And then I looked around, and all around me in 360 degrees and from above came these foul, ugly, demonic beings. Gargoyles, ugly, small ones and big ones, and they're all just rushing at me. And my only thought was, finally, a fair fight. And in that moment, I pulled out my sword and I was about to. And then what came out of my heart was a wave of innocence. The weapon was childlike innocence. And then an omnipresent wave of innocence went out and vanquished all of the darkness. The only thing left was innocence. The highest tool, instrument, call it a weapon if you want, that we have available for us in that experience that I went through was innocence. So I thought I would share a couple of experiences for you. I've been a little bit reluctant to do this, but now I'm going to share them more freely and then share with you how to have them of your own. The reason I'm doing this because I'm aware that the season of the birds has arrived. No, not the season of the birds that you would normally think of. That's true too in certain parts of the world. But I'm saying that mankind's upper gate that corresponds to the birds and the colors is opening. That's called gate number 6. We've been at 5, global. We've had global experiences. Now is the time for, if you choose to do so, to experience things in a different way than you've ever experienced them before. That's why I'm sharing these experiences with you. And if you're ready to have journeys of your own, and the reason for sharing this is that these kinds of experiences, when you have them, they can be highly motivating to continue your own personal growth and work, because they come as a result of your own choices and your own desire to want to grow. So let me just put up one more picture for you before we say goodbye. Obviously, this is a few birds, very few, but out of the 20,000 different species of birds and the 300 or 400 billion birds on Earth, there might be 50 birds per human being, approximately. 8 billion people, 400 billion birds. Yeah, you do the math. So the birds represent something that we are capable of doing. So I'm willing to share my bird experiences because I think they will help give you the wings that you want to fly with. And I hope that one day when I'm out there flying along, that I might see some of you flying as well. So take a moment to consider what your own heart might feel and the preciousness of what birds and their songs can bring to you. I hope this has been intriguing enough to give you a little curiosity about how you might experiment with it. Good luck. Talk to you soon.